The 1935 game between Ohio State and Notre Dame inside Ohio Stadium holds a unique place in the series between the Buckeyes and the Fighting Irish. It was the first time the two Midwestern powers ever faced off, and it is also one of the only two times that the Irish have ever beaten Ohio State. This year marks the 90th anniversary of that first Ohio State versus Notre Dame game, which is still one of the most remarkable comebacks and dramatic finishes in either program's history. It's a story with excitement, twists and turns, and some literal Shakespearean drama at the end. So let's dig into the archives. Coverage of that 1935 game bears some remarkable similarities to modern college football media. This was one of the first games of the century, and the hype was incredible. Nearly a month before the game kicked off, tickets were already gone, Notre Dame had sold out its allotment of more than 12,000 seats, and there were no standing room spots available. Ohio Stadium would be packed with more than 81,000 fans in a season where no other home game brought in even 60,000 people. The game was scheduled for November 2nd, just 2 days after Halloween, something the cartoonists in town had a little bit of fun with. Ohio State's team was nicknamed the Scarlet Scourge, and Notre Dame was known as the Ramblers back then because of their reputation for traveling the country to play whichever top teams were willing to take them on. They had officially adopted the Fighting Irish nickname 8 years earlier in 1927, but you saw references to the Ramblers in headlines, cartoons, and articles. The Irish, or Ramblers, brought a fearsome passing attack, at least by the standards of the time. And as Irvin Scheinbeck wrote in the Dispatch, quote, "Trying to analyze the Ohio State-Notre Dame game is as hazardous as tampering with dynamite. But at the risk of having words explode back in the face Saturday night, one can go on record now with the assertion that forward passing, both pro and con, will have more to do with the outcome than any other branch of gridiron technique." 3 days before the game, tempo at practice was a big topic of conversation, and the Buckeyes players were dealing with incredible demands for both tickets and information about how the upcoming game would go. And the Ohio State coaching staff was expressing concerns about the passing connection between Notre Dame's William Shakespeare, yes, really, his nickname was Bard, and Wayne Milner, nicknamed Tarzan. 2 days before the game, and you can stop me if you've heard this one before, traffic was a big concern around campus. Leaders were encouraging fans to just leave their cars at home, get to the stadium early, hang around for a while after to let the traffic clear out. Notre Dame fans were expected to invade Columbus with hotels sold out and extra trains coming into town to serve all of the additional fans. National sports writers, including Grantland Rice, came to town to see the game in person, basically the 1930s version of College Game Day. The sports pages were all focused on how well Ohio State's early season schedule had prepared the Buckeyes for what they called, quote, unquestionably the major test of the school's entire 45 years of football history. Meanwhile, in South Bend, Notre Dame head coach Elmer Layden dished out a handful of platitudes to a reporter on the phone before hustling back out to football practice. "Yes, it's an important game," he said. "Ohio State has a great team. The game will be hard fought. Notre Dame will do its best. Notre Dame will rely on hard blocking and tackling, fast charging. We plan no new or spectacular offense." And finally, "Excuse me, please." No word on how many games at a time the Irish planned to take it. Michigan's head coach Harry Kipke couldn't avoid weighing in on the game between two other Midwestern powers. He picked Ohio State to win. And the wife of Ohio State head coach Francis Schmidt made it known that the coach, he wasn't nervous about the upcoming game. "Francis," she said, quote, "is acting no differently than at any time since we were married during the week before a game. He is apparently perfectly normal." Just like today, a big game for the Buckeyes pretty much dominates the news cycle around Columbus. The 1935 election was less than a week away, but the Columbus Citizen newspaper reported that, quote, "Saturday's football game puts a lid on political drive," and that, quote, Candidates for city offices find no one pays attention with the Irish here. The Irish were in town. They arrived in Columbus on Friday morning. The city's mayor, who was, yes, up for re-election, he met their train and handed head coach Layden a key to the city. There was insider content back then, just like there is today. Of course, back then it consisted of photos of players getting a massage from a trainer or combing their hair, or Ohio State halfback Joe Williams getting some pointers on speed from none other than Olympian Jesse Owens. The day of the game, the evening papers were all about the incredible traffic jams around campus. Of course, the game itself kicked off at 2 p.m. and hadn't wrapped up in time for their printing deadlines for the evening editions. That meant there was plenty of time for Grandma Athletics to tell Ohio State fans to enjoy themselves during this much-anticipated game in an editorial cartoon. As for the game itself, Buckeye fans did enjoy themselves for at least most of the afternoon. As the next day's coverage in the Dispatch said, quote, "The Lightning Raiders from South Bend were so decisively outclassed by Ohio State in the first half that they seemed to have gotten into the wrong stadium. Ohio State jumped out to a lead just 4 minutes into the game when an interception and a lateral on the return led to a 70-yard touchdown. The term pick six was not yet in vogue, but that's what it was. The Buckeyes had an early 7-0 lead after the PAT was made. Another interception handed the ball to the Ohio State offense and set up Jumping Joe Williams for a 4-yard touchdown and a 13-0 lead after the extra point went wide. That advice from Jesse Owens obviously paid off for Jumping Joe. That 13-point lead looked, as the Dispatch said, like $1 million heading into the fourth quarter, but it didn't take long for the Irish to start chipping away at it. Notre Dame scored on a 1-yard run early in the fourth quarter, but the PAT hit the crossbar, leaving the score 13-6 Ohio State. The score stayed the same until the final 2 minutes when Notre Dame scored again, and once again missed the extra point to trail 13-12. The Irish tried an onside kick, but the Buckeyes recovered it and were in a position to run out the clock until Notre Dame's Andy Pilney forced a fumble by Ohio State's Dick Belts. The Irish fell on it, and they had one more chance. Pilney, playing on both sides of the ball, took what basically amounted to a quarterback draw for 30 yards down to the Ohio State 19. He was injured on that play, and Shakespeare took over for him. On the next play, Shakespeare took a handoff, rolled right, and threw it to Milner for the game-winning touchdown. What the Columbus Citizen described as, quote, a long slanting pass, Shakespeare to Milner. Yes, the same combination that the Ohio State coaching staff had been worried about in the days before the game. That Shakespeare always did great work with omens and foreshadowing, didn't he? The game ended 18-13. Notre Dame fans stormed the field, and despite the efforts of a handful of policemen, the Fighting Irish fans tore down the goalposts and carried them all the way downtown. The next day's paper compared the loss to the fall of Humpty Dumpty and said OSU fans used, quote, ifs and aspirin to try to patch things up. The Citizen started its post-game coverage with the note, quote, here's a Monday after a Saturday defeat and nobody's trying to fire the football coach. That's refreshing. But anything farther than that in the face of Notre Dame's 18-13 victory is an alibi. There isn't anything left. It was the most glorious finish in Ohio State's football history, even if, from an Ohio State angle, the wrong team won. Notre Dame's luck of the Irish would run out the following week when they lost to Northwestern 14-7, and then they tied Army the following week at Yankee Stadium. They finished ranked 8th in the nation with a 7-1-1 record. That 18-13 loss to Notre Dame was the only blemish in Ohio State's record that season. They finished the year beating Chicago, Illinois, and Michigan. That win over the Wolverines was 38-0 and the most lopsided win the Buckeyes have ever had in the game. Ohio State finished the year at 7-1 and ranked 5th in the nation. Minnesota, who Ohio State did not play, finished 1st in the country at 8-0. The 1935 game featured all of the hype and stakes and drama of the 2023 matchup in South Bend. The Buckeyes, of course, won that one with a come-from-behind, final-minute touchdown, just as Notre Dame did back in 1935. And now, the teams are set to face off in the highest-stakes game in their series history with the national championship on the line Monday night in Atlanta.